Hare Krishna. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Jai Shri Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis all over the world. Welcome back. This is our first live stream with our wool Prabhupada cap from krishnastore.com. Let's all give it up for krishnastore.com, our unofficial sponsor, I guess, or supporter. I don't know what they're called. Yeah, they're not sponsoring us at all. There's no I mean, we might get a Hare Krishna from Madhu Visa Prabhuji, or one of the many other great devotees. They may be rooting for us here, but yeah, if you need any Krishna goods, go to krishnastore.com. I bought a whole bunch of stuff, mostly from India, and imported it directly to South Korea, including shipping. It was less than $150, so I did not have to pay any taxes, customs, and none of that. Everything was shipped except one canvas poster. I'm checking right now. That's a separate shipment. Oh, they finally picked it up, but there's no... Oh, no, it's arrived in Korea. Let's see how fast they did this. Information. Okay, first was in California on the 13th, and then on the 15th, it arrived in Korea. UPS is really fast. I mean, it's just one poster, so it's just probably an envelope. But the last time I actually got DHL to ship the Krishna store stuff here, there was an address problem, and then they had trouble contacting me, and then it was trouble. But like, I gave the right address, but because it's in English, they're trying to read a Korean address in English. They just got confused, but it's very straightforward address. Like, someone made a mistake there. I don't think it was me. Like, DHL should have an option like, oh, do you want to also include the address in the local language? Like, yes, please. Like, let me just do that at the beginning. I can get why they want to require English, but, you should also accept the local language once it gets there. Like, why not? Because that's what I ended up doing anyway. I had to give the local Korean guys my local Korean address. And they're like, oh, yeah, we know exactly what that is. Okay, without any further ado, let's get to it. This will probably be a quick stream. These verses this is what I'd call a transitional verse cluster. It's mostly a bridge between the verse cluster before and after. So last week we did those really special / essential verses on death and the final moment of death leading to the next life. And then Krishna kind of summarizes that again and adds a few details here. And then next week, we're going into precise detail on specific techniques, as you'll see when we get to verse 11 today. We're doing chapter 8, verse 9 through 11. And once again, I'll just read all 3 verses back to back. No interruptions. Literal translation from our very own Hridayananda Das Goswami Maharaj, who I would simply call HD Goswami, because that's how he's actually known on the internet. And this stream is also on the internet, so I think it's the best way to do it. Pretty simple. But first we can do our invocation mantras. Join me or don't. I don't care. I'm just doing the best I can with my situation. Oh, also this purple jute kurta. It's maybe one size too big on me. I've also lost a lot of weight recently. But this is my first jute kurta or I've ever got, and just love this purple color. Awesome. So worth it. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Verses 9 through 11. One should remember him as the ancient seer and constant ruler, smaller than the smallest, the creator of all, with inconceivable form, lustrous like the sun beyond darkness. At the time of passing, filled with devotion and yogic power, mind unmoving, fixing the life air between the eyebrows, one reaches that supreme divine person. I shall now briefly describe to you that which knowers of the Vedas call the unperishing place, into which passion-free ascetics enter, desiring which they follow chaste practices. So, quick notes on this before I close out of here. Person is with a capital P. I believe that's emphasized by the author, perhaps more than the Sanskrit itself. Or perhaps maybe it's better to say that it's standard in Sanskrit to see Purusha probably is the word person as a special term, but we just don't know that in English. So I believe the author, H.D. Goswami, is capitalizing person to make sure it's known that what we're dealing with here. That in the sense, Krishna is a person like we are persons, but in another sense, he's the supreme person. He's the most personable of all persons, and so on. And definitely not impersonal. Also, chaste practices, the final two words in verse 11. I remember already, top of my head, Prabhupada translates that as celibacy, which is a bit more precise and technical, and chaste practices is more vague. So that's interesting. Probably brahmachari is the Sanskrit word there, which typically means celibacy, but it also means a whole bunch of other things. Like brahmacharya life, means like student life where you're celibate, but also controlling your diet and living with a guru and waking up early and austerities, yada yada. It actually means all that stuff, which is which you could literally translate into English as chaste practices. Yeah, I was right. Verse 11, the word is brahmacharyam, which Prabhupada translates literally and colloquially as celibacy. Which is fine. I mean, you could say that is the core principle of brahmachari life is celibacy. I would not argue with that. That seems totally fair. Although, what H.D. Goswami's service with the literal translation is to just do exactly this, to give just a purely literal Sanskrit to English translation, minus a lot of the cultural differences and grammar differences, and so you can read it just verse by verse back to back. That's the whole Gita, and then the other section of his book is like explaining the Gita, referencing the verses, and that's very different from Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita. There's a different intention with the authors. Prabhupada is giving the definitive, universal, absolute Bhagavad Gita as it is for everyone. And because it's for everyone, and we're talking about billions of human beings for hundreds and thousands of years going on into the future. Most of those people will actually not be scholars. So he's giving, as much as he can, a readable, I don't want to say conventional, but like a very readable in English, standard English, not really modern English, but standard plain English Bhagavad Gita that anyone can read and understand as long as they've graduated high school and they're, moderately literate. But at the same time, it's also suitable for advanced readers and scholars who can, really dig deep into it as well. And H.D. Goswami's Bhagavad Gita is specifically designed for devotees like me, and probably you if you're listening to this, who will use it in conjunction with Prabhupada's Gita, not to replace Prabhupada's Gita, but to give a more illuminating look on what's actually happening with the Sanskrit, from the perspective of Sanskrit, as opposed to, understanding the Sanskrit from an English language and culture type perspective. We already have that in Prabhupada's Gita. It is completely sufficient and complete in that sense. So if you have no inclination to go into the Sanskrit or the kind of ancient Vedantic linguistics and culture, you could actually just skip over H.D. Goswami's Bhagavad Gita and Garuda Das's as well, I believe. No disrespect to those great Prabhus. I've read both a bunch of times, probably, because I'm in the same, class and caste as them. So it's just in my nature to just read ancient texts and study them all the time. So I think it's awesome. But I also know most people are not like that. So, this is how it is. So verse 9 by Prabhupada. One should meditate upon the Supreme Person as the one who knows everything, as he who is the oldest, who is the controller, who is smaller than the smallest, who is the maintainer of everything, who is beyond all material conception, who is inconceivable, and who is always a person. He is luminous like the sun, and being transcendental, is beyond this material nature. So my first thought after reading this is that this verse seems kind of out of place in a good way, because it's just good advice for like any time and context. But, in the previous verse, previous, Krishna's talking about whatever you remember when you quit the body, that's where you go next. And then Krishna's like, okay, well, you should always devote yourself to me and then think of me. So hopefully at the time of death, you can do that. And you'll be sure to reach me. And then now is kind of a transition where he's like, well, who am I? What exactly is this person you're going to meditate on? And with which specific characteristics? And that's, a big part of this chapter and the next one too. So I think this is like foreshadowing. Krishna's kind of setting up now what we're really going to get more into in detail, especially the very next verse cluster. One interesting part here is that Krishna, the Supreme Lord, is the oldest. So first of all, that's neat, because in more advanced stages, like if you're reading all 10 plus cantos of the Bhagavatam, you'll know that, Krishna on this earth, he's at least never appears more old than 16 years old. He has this youthful, beautiful luster to him. And that is a more advanced form to worship. But because it's more advanced, it's not recommended for beginners. And that's the the Bhagavad Gita is for beginners, and the Bhagavad Gita by Prabhupada is, as I said at the beginning, is for not only beginners but for modern people who don't know anything about Krishna or India or anything. And also at the same time, they could reread it millions of times and keep getting deeper each time. But once you really get hooked on this person, Bhagavan, eventually you'll, develop some kind of taste for, or at least an understanding to know different forms. As for me, I still like the Gita the most. Even I prefer worshiping Krishna exactly as he tells me to worship him, more than, the very special advanced Bhagavatam stuff. That's just, I think that's my Bhav, or it's just my style. I just like fundamentals. I mean, it's part of my life living in the Far East all these years. It's just like, that's how we do it here. We don't like to go too advanced and technical and complicated and sophisticated. We, especially in China, we really like just sticking with the fundamentals and just staying with them, just digging deep into basic, almost childish like fundamentals, which can seem belittling and offensive sometimes, but I hope y'all can see it comes from a place of wisdom, basically, and maturity. So now also theologically, from that perspective, the oldest person, what does it mean? Does it just mean a guy with a longer beard and more wrinkles than another guy? No, 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 no. The oldest means the creator and the origin of everything. But in terms of the practice of meditation, when you meditate on the oldest person, that's far more effective than meditating on the kind of impersonal idea of the creator or the origin of the universe. That's just like words and ideas. But as the oldest person, especially as the oldest person who maintains a youthful form forever, that's very worshipable, literally worshipable. It's just natural for the persons that we are to worship a person and to worship an idea. Smaller than the smallest is obviously referring to Paramatma, who must be by definition smaller than Atma. And he controls the living entities in this tiny form, but also controls the huge planets and galaxies as well. And now we're getting into Achintya Rupam, which literally means inconceivable form. Yep, and that's Prabhupada and H.D. Goswami's literal translation. Achintya, inconceivable, Rupam, form. The end of the purport is interesting. Prabhupada says, who is really a person of intelligence? Quoting Prabhupada, therefore, intelligent persons, avoiding useless argument and speculation, should accept what is stated in scriptures like the Vedas, Gita, and Srimad Bhagavatam, and follow the principles they set down. This will lead one to understanding. Unquote. What context is Prabhupada talking about? Before Prabhupada talks about achintya, which means beyond. It's not just this is a technical word. It doesn't just mean like, whoa, bro, it's really hard to figure out, but if you, yeah, man, you just got to study more, you'll get it eventually. It's like, no, you literally can't get it by material senses. It means beyond this material world, which cannot be touched or tasted or sensed by argument, logic, philosophical speculation. It's literally inconceivable. So the intelligent thing to do is to accept that and, go on accepting the truth in other ways and dealing it maturely like that. The foolish thing to do is to say to yourself, well, inconceivable. Well, I can understand anything. I'll just work harder and eventually I'll understand it. No, that's quite foolish. I know I fall into that trap quite a lot. What I do, how do I get away from that trap is I just have to constantly remind myself that I'm joking, basically, when I do certain daydreaming, speculation, exploring. And I sometimes forget, but I do try my best when talking to others to caveat and preface my words saying, oh, this is just speculation. I'm not, I don't care. Like, I'm right or wrong. I don't care. It's, like, it's not quoting from Shastra when I say, well, this is how it can be the smallest and control the galaxy at the same time because blah 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 blah. It's like, no, I'm just like fantasizing. I know it's not conceivable. Verse 10. One who, at the time of death, fixes his life air between the eyebrows and in full devotion engages himself in remembering the Supreme Lord will certainly attain to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This verse is also like foreshadowing. And it's the same truth we heard in the last cluster, how the final moment of life leads to the next moment. But this one gives just a little bit more detail, namely fixing life air, which is prana in Sanskrit, between the eyebrows. And Prabhupada mentions in verse 14, we're going to learn more about this. Where does he say that? Yeah. Oh, yeah. He writes it correctly in English, so it's hard to pick out with your eyes. You have to look for FOUR like that. 14. For one who remembers me without deviation, I am easy to obtain, O son of Purta, because of his constant engagement in devotional service. And this is specifically what Prabhupada is talking about, is someone who may not be practicing such particular yogas about prana between the eyebrows, but someone who's simply a pure devotee, being always engaged in Krishna consciousness. That person can remember Sri Bhagavan by his grace. A very small purport here, two really short, sweet, perfect paragraphs. In the second one, Prabhupada talks about yoga balena, which is in the verse here, that term. He literally translates that as by the power of mystic yoga. And then the purport, which you can't tell from just the literal translation, Prabhupada says, this is significant because it implies, my word implies, that without practice of yoga, one cannot come to this transcendental state of being at the time of death. And this is also a basic logic thing, but Prabhupada continues, one cannot suddenly remember the Supreme Lord at death unless he is practiced in some yoga system, especially bhakti yoga. Why is this common sense logic? Prabhupada continues, since one's mind at death is very disturbed, one should practice transcendence through yoga during one's life. So once you actually start thinking about this, it's actually obvious. And this, I believe I mentioned last time, this is basic psychology. I mean, how are you going to, when you're conditioning yourself daily with thousands of mantras every day, when you have some regular sadhana that's been going on for years and decades of your life, and then some big moment happens, could be death or not death, maybe just a big spiritual test, and you have you know, a big test, um, well, what happens? Well, you're gonna likely pass that test and remember what you've been practicing to remember all those years and decades. Duh. And then the in the opposite situation, if you never practice, but you just believe, and that's the shortfall of many Christians today. Oh, I believe in Christ. I just said, I just proclaim it. Therefore, the work is done. He died for my sins. So what do I have to do? I don't know if that works. Now, I'm not talking about someone who actually understands what that even means. And that's one reason I'm very happy to take this Christian Bible course I've been taking, because I still don't know, even after doing a few months of this course, I don't actually know what that means when Christ says, died for the, I don't know if he said it or not, but I think it's an Old Testament prophecy that the Son of Man will die for the sins of mankind. I don't know what that means. Like, it kind of makes sense because the crucifixion story is so intense. It does seem like the ultimate sacrifice that has, ultimate implications. But beyond that very vague sense I have, that makes sense, but it's very vague. I don't actually understand what that means. I hope one day I will. That's it. Verse 11. Persons learned in the Vedas who utter Omkara and who are great sages in the renounced order enter into Brahman. Desiring such perfection, one practices celibacy. I shall now explain to you this process by which one may attain salvation. Okay, so the translation here is quite different than H.D. Goswami's. One thing is the order. I shall now explain to you. That is written first, I believe, in H.D. Goswami's verse. Here it's last, and this actually makes more sense because it's in the next verse we do next week where, he's going to explain it to us. Also unique about this translation is utter Omkara. That's not in the Sanskrit. The word Omkara is not there. The only thing close to that I'm seeing is Aksharam, which means inexhaustible. But it never literally mentions Omkara. Krishna talks about Aksharam, I believe, is where Omkara comes from. Veda Vidaha, a person conversant with the Vedas. And there are great stages, Yatayaha, Vitaragaha, in the renounced order. They practice brahmacharyam, and Krishna says, okay, from now on, in the next few verses or rest of the chapter, I'm not sure, Krishna's going to explain what these great sages do, especially ones who are already conversant with the Vedas and practicing brahmacharya. Because remember, guys, we're at chapter 8 now. So we've already learned the basics of someone who is not learned in the Vedas, how they practice, what they should do with basic things like karma and whatever. Now we're talking about what particular things someone practices who already is quite advanced in some ways. So, and this is also, then when you read this in English, it's so obvious that this is the end of the transitional verse cluster. And it also directly leads into the next one. So once again, I'm grateful for that. I don't know how long our streak is of verse clusters, exactly 3 or 4 verses each week we've been doing that fit perfectly. So cool. Now within this verse cluster, well, uttering Omkara, that's a new thing mentioned here, which may be, on the same kind of platform or category as fixing prana within the eyebrows. But really the main key here is the word brahmacharyam, which Prabhupada says is celibacy. And that's a recurring theme, I believe, throughout the Gita, pretty much. Maybe it goes by different words. Brahmacharyam in its most general sense means austerities and sacrifice. And that is absolutely a recurring theme throughout all 18 chapters, pretty much. But now in this particular sense of like celibacy and like that, now in chapter 8, Krishna's going to hand it down to us. We have another short purport, which is another indication to me that this is a transitional verse cluster primarily. And at the end of the very last line of the purport is Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Why does Prabhupada? It's very interesting. Sometimes Prabhupada will just say the word Mahamantra, and other times he'll spell it out word by word. And this is not an accident or a coincidence. He does it at different times to stress certain things, emphasize certain things. So brahmacharya, especially in the traditional sense, like what this book is referring to, which is what was happening 5,000 years ago. Prabhupada says in the purport here that's impossible. For such life like that is not at all possible in this age. The social construction of the world has changed so much, there is no possibility of one practicing celibacy from the beginning of student life. I guess that we all kind of know that we're in a modern and very different world, but I think maybe the key word here is from the beginning. It's just the way the world is socially structured. Like if you're lucky like me, once you graduate from like kind of high school and college and you're kind of on your own and you're kind of fortunate enough with financial savings and whatever else that you have the free time to then start really focusing on some sort of celibacy type path or like a judo practice or yoga, whatever. Like, yeah, you can kind of do it like that. But for most people to just from the very beginning be full on brahmachari and just keep that going for like through past their adult years is very rare and strange. It's a strange idea. It's rare. It's hard to say it's feasible. And in the world, while there's many institutions, there is no recognized institution where students can be educated in brahmachari principles. And that's one goal of ISKCON is to bring back an institution that can do things like this. And on the surface, it seems we have that in many different places within ISKCON, but in practice, there's a lot of trouble happening, a lot of troublemakers abusing students and whatever else. But this one, just like Varnashram and the caste system, it doesn't change the fact, the eternal reality of living in this non-eternal world. Unless you practice celibacy, advancement will be very difficult in spiritual life. That's just a fact. And because that's a hard fact that you can't get away from, there's always a way out. So while brahmachari in its pure, standard, awesome, traditional form, whatever, is basically not possible in this age, well, there is something else that is possible. That is, and what Prabhupada writes in the final line in the purport here is chanting the Maha Mantra, which Lord Chaitanya has announced, according to scripture, is not only the best way to attain spiritual advancement, but the only way. Chaitanya literally says it's the only way. There is no other way. There is no other way. Eva Kevalam. Except chanting the holy names. So this Maha Mantra is the most transcendental activity. Even if you're in the old world where with many different advanced yogas, chanting the holy names of the Lord is still probably the most transcendental activity a human bodied soul can engage in. But at the same time, it's the most simple and the most practical. And that's actually the key why it is recommended for this age. It's not because it's more spiritual or something like that. It's because it's actually simple and practical. And most Kali mlechas like us, we just don't have the brain power or the time available to engage in anything else. There's plenty of people who are just too dumb to understand the Bhagavad Gita and the Bible, and so many, they just can't get it. Maybe they know how to read, but there's so many sins floating around, they just like can't take to that practice, and then they can't commit to like a hardcore yoga. So what can we do? Do we just give up? No, we can never give up. So we have this Maha Mantra to take us through. All right, got to stop there. Less than 40 minutes, a little longer than I wanted, but that's okay. We'll see you next week to get into more detail on this awesome topic. Hare Krishna, Jai Srila Prabhupada, Jai Sri Vaishnava, Vaishnavis all over the world, Jai Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Hari Bol.